We were acquired in March of 2020, and the timing was crazy because it changed for almost everybody overnight. Panic. What do I do? We're going to get through this. We are going to find a way.
You're listening to episode 15 of Success Unscripted. This is my last official episode of season 1 as I step away to focus on my recruiting business and growing this little human inside of me. Will there be a season 2? I hope so. When will I release it? No idea. I do have a couple of episodes in the works, which I might release ad hoc, and I've also started posting more content on my YouTube channel and on LinkedIn, so you can follow me there if you want. Today's guest is Melissa Loble, who is the Chief Academic Officer and former Chief Customer Experience Officer at Instructure. Instructure is the company behind Canvas, the #1 learning platform, and we talk a lot about the extreme changes that the business went through. Instructure was acquired by Thoma Bravo right when the pandemic hit, which caused a huge influx of students onto their platform. So lots of great learnings from Melissa. As always, thank you for being here. I'm your host, Sara Roberts, and you're listening to Success Unscripted. Really appreciate you being here. Excited to learn from you and hear about your story. So why don't you just tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into CS?
Yeah, so I fell into CX as a practitioner of my discipline. I have led CS teams, particularly in the educational technology and SaaS space. But I fell into it, like I said, via being a customer of those solutions. And I think that's a really interesting perspective to step into CS because it enables you to understand what it feels like to be part of a partnership, a customer experience journey that you're going on together with the technology partner or even just larger partner that you may be leveraging. So through that CS experience early on, I continued to build that. And I went back and forth from being a CS practitioner to an educator and or a customer of customer experience as well as delivering that customer experience in my space. And like I said, I think that blend has really lended me well to think with a customer perspective, but still a business success outcome set of drivers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that can't be really overstated, being able to understand really where the customer's coming from. And it's a piece of advice that I give to a lot of people, especially these days, because the job market is so tough. Whether you're looking to get into CS for the first time or you're just looking to stand out amongst other applicants, is like, okay, what do you know? Who's the customer that you know? And because if you know the pain points, if you've been that person, like your ramp time is way quicker, and you're just going to be able to bring a lot more insight.
I think you can also, I completely agree. And I think you can also bring the unique perspective of the particular industry you come from to that table.
Hmm.
And I think everybody will say, oh, my industry is unique, my buyer's unique. Well, I actually agree. I think every industry has its nuances, its culture,
Yeah.
its norms. And by understanding that or having lived in that, you can incorporate what you know about that into your service delivery as a customer success executive.
Yeah. Well, and you know what they're doing all day long, when they're busy and how they want to communicate, when they want to communicate, what language they use. So there's a
Exactly.
lot of little things that you probably wouldn't really be able to learn that unless you were in their shoes to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also understand their own career paths.
Mm,
I think as customer success professionals, we forget about the individual that we're interacting with and we think about the organization.
yeah.
Of course, we want to drive to outcomes. Of course, we want to drive to success. But we have to remember we're also partnering with somebody else, most likely. Usually there's a single main contact.
Yeah.
There may be a whole team you work with, but you've got your single contact. That person's on their own career journey, on their own
Right.
personal journey. And you have to think about how do you lift them up as well in your journey together so that you're not only successful for your organizations, but you're successful as humans.
Yeah.
And to understand that, I think coming from the space helps because you can know what those career paths look like, what the
Yeah.
challenges are, what opportunities that individual might be looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. I haven't heard somebody explain it like that, but I know my husband Dan, who you know, who
Mhm.
introduced us. He's a senior sales rep at Salesforce, and a lot of his job is wrangling cats and helping teach other people how to sell a strategy or a product to somebody else, either partner within Salesforce or talking to a customer who has to talk to their boss. If you can make that person look good to their own boss and you guys are going after the same outcome, but like they actually are personally invested, then of course that's going to be a better outcome for everybody.
Absolutely. Or if you can lift them up, it's a great way to do things like case studies or highlights.
Mm,
If you can lift up the unique things they're doing that perhaps they don't have a chance to share with their boss or their organization, it's just not part of the day-to-day, meat of what they have to
yeah,
do. But suddenly they post a perspective in LinkedIn that you've posted together about an innovative thing they've done. Those are places that they can get attention as well
yeah,
to impactful work that they're doing through the relationship that you're building as the customer success professional in partnership with them.
yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So let's take a step back and tell me what Instructure does.
Sure. So Instructure is probably most known for our flagship product, Canvas. It's a learning management system that serves K-12 education, higher education, continuing and vocational education, and some corporate education globally. We've been around for about 12 years now and are largely focused on impacting the lifelong learning journey and how that experience can shape not only an individual's ability to find career progression, but also just their contributions into their own communities and society.
And then what's your role today?
So I'm the Chief Academic Officer with Instructure. I started that role a bit earlier this year, so it's 2024. I started at the beginning of 2024. In that capacity, I'm responsible for ensuring that Instructure is a learning organization, that we're thinking about our customer or our potential customer from the lens in which they see their work every day, an academic lens. How are we impacting that lifelong learning journey? How do we understand how to serve our students, learners around the world? And how do we have the particular impact that, as organizations we desire at, the various points somebody might take in that learning
Mm,
journey? So I bring that lens to it. I spent, though, prior to this current role transition, the majority of my time leading customer experience for Instructure and really owning that customer centric approach that our company takes.
cool. And you have such an interesting perspective because is- you've been at Instructure for so long, it's gone through these different phases, right? It started as a kind of smaller private company and then
Hmm.
went public and then went private again and was acquired by a private equity firm.
Hmm.
Tell me a little bit about those different transitions and those experiences.
Yeah, the transitions have been interesting. So as you mentioned, we started from a private venture-backed organization. We went public. We went take private back and became PE owned. And then a year into our PE owned journey, we went public again. So throughout that path or that journey, there are interesting moments, particularly as a customer experience leader in that path, or even just a member of the customer experience team, and how at different phases you approach your business in different ways,
Mhm.
and how, if I had it to look back at various stages, I wish I could have future proofed for the future stages a little bit more. We always do, right? Hindsight's 2020. But that path has created an interesting pattern or cadence to challenges and innovations that we've done from a customer experience perspective in order to really maintain and grow our existing customer base.
Can you think of some specific examples?
I would love to, sure. So there's all sorts of interesting examples. Probably one of the most meaningful ones, or maybe memorable at the very least, was at the time we were being taken private. So this is out there in the public. I encourage people, if you're interested or curious about this story, it's an interesting one. But we had some fairly active investors, which put us in a position of looking to either be acquired by private equity or perhaps a strategic organization looking to pull in our solution. And so I was part of as the leader of customer experience. And at the time, customer experience was our services organization, our customer success management organization, our ongoing support organization, some documentation. And while I wasn't directly at that time responsible for renewals, I was responsible for envisioning renewals for our potential buyers. So it was really fascinating to me was putting together data, and we had never looked at our business, particularly our customer success business, with such a detailed lens, but putting together our data and reflecting on how we were successful or where what stage were we at
Mm-hmm.
in each one of those areas. Presenting that particularly to private equity was fascinating because multiple times from multiple organizations they would come back and say that's some of the richest data we've ever seen, or that's some of the most thoughtful insight into where are you at and where could you go from a customer experience perspective. And it helped us. It really not only going into a new owner, which was really helpful for me as a leader because they had seen the experience that we were bringing to the table as part of the process, but it also helped position us as an organization as a really strong and rich organization with a strong and rich customer base.
Mm-hmm.
And it was surprising to me because I felt like, oh, we could be reporting so much more. Oh, if I had access to all of this data, I could have gotten in deeper. And yet they were telling me this was really deep where you
Yeah.
landed and an advantage in this process.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, just hearing the story of having customer success really drive that business to that next level. And good on Thoma Bravo also for really investing in
Yeah.
customer success, because I know once they acquired Instructure, they really did invest,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which
It's been, yeah, they have, sorry, they did invest at the time of acquisition. And they, whenever you get bought as an organization, there's always opportunities for synergies and for rethinking how you're operating your business. But it was really interesting. I give Thoma Bravo a lot of credit for how much they understood the customer experience was critical to our future strategic growth. As I continued in my role to present that back to them, they continued to support the vision that we had for customer experience because it was directly related to that growth pattern
Mhm.
that we were looking to seek. And I think a lot of people are afraid during acquisition times, whether it's private equity, whether it's a strategic organization, whether it's a merger, that it's all about operational efficiency and profitability. But I think if you position as a customer experience leader your work that you're doing in the right way and directly aligned to future success, it doesn't have to be all about that. You can get investments in the right technologies, the right education programs, the right experiments in order to grow without having to worry about some of those, oh, fear of reduction
Yeah.
or fear of lack of investment.
And I know we've talked about this. I've asked you, like, have you always been a data person? And you said, well, not really. And we've also talked about how the data, which I don't think there's a single organization out there that would say that their data is clean or that they have the best data. There's always something wrong with it. There's always something wrong with everything that's in the CRM. Knowing that, like, without necessarily a data background and with imperfect data, how do you approach that? I mean, I feel like that would be pretty intimidating to most people to go into a boardroom with Thoma Bravo and make that case for customer success. Like, where do you start? What do you think about?
Yeah, that's such an important question on where do you start and what do you think about? Because I think many organizations, particularly if you start from a small startup position like we did, you drive your data in the direction of what do I need to know to grow my non renewals or grow my new sales? And so, even what you allow your sales reps to put in CRMs and how you track a customer and the data that you collect on customers can become really dialed in from a new sales
Right.
perspective. But then you have big gaps on the customer experience perspective. I think it took us 2 years to put together a health dashboard in order to understand customer health. And you would think that that would be something much easier to do because you should be gathering all those data elements in a meaningful, constructed way so that you can extract out health. But sure enough, no. Sure, we did CSATs, we tracked revenue, we tracked our renewals, but there's so much more complexity to that data. So, one thing that I had wished we had thought about very early on as we started to collect data, as we started to sell to customers, was to think about what does that data look like, not just for a new sale, but also for an ongoing customer relationship.
Right.
And not being a data person, you're absolutely right. We've talked about this. I'm not trained. I'm not an analyst in any way, but knowing the questions you want to ask, knowing the data sources is going to be really
Mm,
important, and being able to trust those data sources or know where those data sources are going to have weaknesses, so that when you go in and present, here is what I see, and this is why I need these investments or why I need to make these pivots. You at least know directionally what you're presenting is right,
yep.
or you know how to present details within the data or specific examples to then still make that same argument, even if you can't get the aggregate data to tell the story in the right way. There are ways to work around that, but you have to start with your questions and your story, and then back into what can I use? What can I use? How detailed is it? How detailed is it not? And how do I then merge that together so that I'm not waiting on perfect data forever
Yeah.
and taking action in the moment?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you are a huge fan of really knowing the customer and knowing those specific stories. So it sounds like
Yes,
that's also something that you use to, you know, back up the data that you have.
absolutely. And, back to stories or from my past, part of the ongoing relationship with our owners, even though we are a public company, we are largely still owned by Thoma Bravo, is a regular reporting of our performance, services performance and margin performance and delivery performance, our support performance. Especially during COVID, we had some hiccups because we had such an inundated you know
Right.
environment with hundreds and thousands of new teachers using our platform. So tracking to that support, and then most importantly tracking to the renewal revenue and breaking it down into pieces, all of that on a regular basis being presented to people that want to help you. They want to help you pick apart your business and figure out where can you do things differently so you can be more successful. Can be really stressful unless, I believe, you know the ins and outs of that data. You don't have to know every deal, but you should know major deals, you should know directional deals. You should be able to talk to not just what the numbers say, but more importantly what the emotions behind that were. So you lost a renewal. Well, what was the context in which that happened, and then what can you learn from that context, and how do you then present that? Or same thing with winning a big renewal or expansion on a big renewal. What is that story around that? Those pieces not only earn you credibility, as especially as a customer success leader looking for an opportunity to be part of an executive strategy conversation. You need that credibility. You need to know those deals. You need to understand the mechanics of the customer health, but you also need it in order, again, to get that investment.
Right.
If people trust you and invest in you and believe you understand it from the bottom to the top, they're more likely to give you the kinds of resources you need to go make the changes in that bottom to top experience.
Right. Right. And speaking of making a case for investments, I know you focused a lot on the services margin. Tell me a little bit more about
I
that.
sure did.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, services margin is so I think in the industry, there's a lot of conversation about should services be in service of a successful customer or as a product line
Hmm.
and a revenue driver in and of themselves, right? So you've got these two competing camps. And I believe you can have them exist in the middle, particularly if you lean towards the revenue driving side. So I get the opportunity. I've been able to work with a number of smaller companies in the educational technology space. And they'll often say, yeah, but I need to give free services away. I need to use this in order to help this adoption problem or to make sure the customer gets implemented. And I often coach them against that because first of all, you need to drive value and attach value to your services. So you need to have a dollar value. Now, if you want to discount that, that's something different. But you need to establish value because you want that customer to come back later and want additional services. And if you've not established the value up front, you've suddenly created this blurred opportunity for is it going to be paid help or free help that you're going to give somebody in
Mm,
the future? And then the second piece to creating value at the outset is not only do you attach value to those services, but you also give yourself an opportunity to really dig in and ask yourself, how much does it cost to deliver that service and why? And how can I think about optimizing that service in the future? So, again, discount away, but I discourage from free
mhm.
for those reasons. And then as you pull it through, and you become a real revenue driving part of the organization, yes, you've got services that are going to drive margin and good margin and contribute back to your organization's margin. But you're also going to then build up more capital that you can apply back to experimenting with new
Yep.
services, launching new approaches, or even helping the rest of the business with experiments that your team might be able to deliver against that doesn't have to be part of the overall margin attainment. So it just allows you more space and more opportunity if you think about that margin early on and set the structure to drive towards margin over time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super insightful. Um, I keep hearing you say experimentation, which is
Mhm.
one of those words that when I'm talking to a candidate and they talk about experiments or A/B testing, I'm always like, yes, 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 tell me more because I just think I think experimentation is such an important tool to use because it will prove those hypotheses wrong, and it allows you to tweak, and it also takes a certain person to set those up and also be able to recognize, hey, what I thought was the case isn't, and so now we need to pivot. And so um curious if you have any memorable experiments that you've run that you can share with
Yeah.
us.
So I completely agree with you about experimentation. And you started the question with talking about candidates and something that, when somebody mentions, oh, I've had experience experimenting and there's a structure that I do, that's a real win.
Yeah.
I'll give a quick story on that. I completely agree. I'm in the process of, I'm the chair of a nonprofit. And as chair, we have a CEO that's retiring. And so I'm in the process of helping find the new CEO as the chair of this organization. And anyway, the search committee came together and we talked about the different skills, and the word entrepreneurial kept coming up. But entrepreneurial is a really big word and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. It could just be scrappy. It could be, well, do anything it takes. It could be, I know how to experiment. It could mean a lot of things. And when we finally asked each other, what did we mean by that? What we really meant was by experimentation. Can you set up an experiment in such a way that you can get data to know whether or not it was successful and how to pivot it without having to wait forever to get the results of that experiment? And so that structure, I think, is really meaningful. I'll give you an example at Instructure where we've done something similar. A number of years ago, there was a partner. I also ran part of our partner program. A partner came to us, they're a services partner, and they do instructional design, which is basically course design
Mhm.
or learning design. And they came to us and said, "Hey, we want to partner. How could we do this?" And I said, "Well, gosh, we don't actually offer a significant amount of services in instructional design or learning design. We help people set their courses up. We've got some graphic design experts and we do some of that, but we've never offered this. Well, let's do one and partner and see where we go. Let's set this up. Let's set some goals for ourselves, some revenue goals, some service program goals, but no other vendor like us has ever done that. Usually there's specialty firms that offer these kinds of services. So we did. We decided, all right, let's try. And we, roughly split revenue, went out there. We were both super flexible in how we approached the market, but we were directed in what we brought out. And we saw some really good success. Both of us had hiccups, both in delivery and in how to price it and package it and stuff, but as we worked through those, the way we set our experiment up, we could pivot as we went based on the feedback we were getting. And now it's one of our most successful lines of
Huh.
services in our organization. And it was just truly an experiment out of a couple of conversations with a partner and being open-minded and thoughtful about how we designed that experiment.
And what were some of the things that you were testing for?
So, testing for market interest. So, lead gen, how deep could we get to interest in institutions even if they didn't purchase? Like, who could we get to with
Yep.
this, and did it lead to an ongoing relationship with prospective or existing customers that were looking to do new projects? So that was one. The second one was revenue, not profitability at first, because we were committed to seeding this. So we knew it might be more expensive to deliver up front than we thought, because we wanted to be flexible. Customer satisfaction. So the first couple of projects, we tried to have a balance between shorter and longer
Hmm.
projects for customers, so that we could get some initial feedback and not have to wait 2 years to hear from a customer that they didn't like that outcome. And then probably the most important ones were, we partnered together when we sold this service to a customer. What exactly were those customers' outcomes? Why were they seeking to buy this? And how aligned were we in having an impact on their outcomes 6 months to a year later once we delivered that project? So those were all sums. We could do some in the progress, right? In progress, we could do some at the end, and then even some we had to come back and reflect on once these projects that we had done together were out in the wild.
Very cool. I want to talk about those first couple of months. I think it was right after you guys got acquired, where you guys were really, really hitting the pavement. There were some kind of dark times there that we've talked about. Yeah, can you share with us what that was like
Mhm.
after the acquisition?
Yeah. So the acquisition was in an interesting place in time. And also, it's an interesting experience for our customers in the educational technology space to see this type of acquisition. So I'll talk about both of them. The first part on the timing. So we were acquired in March of 2020, which, as we all know, was COVID, or when COVID hit.
Yeah.
So suddenly we're in a situation where we're looking at our business and making sure we're operationally efficient. We're trying to transition to a different approach towards looking at our business strategically and driving towards very clear metrics, learning our new owners, and then at the same time facing huge influx of users of our technology, particularly in the K-12 space, because people needed a way to move learning
Yeah.
online. And there were many places that didn't have it. So if you can imagine, here we are a couple months into an acquisition, and it's August. And August, for a large portion of the globe, August is a back to school time. And I think we had onboarded over 1,000 customers in a short period of time. So we have hundreds of thousands of learners and teachers that have never used our platforms.
Oh my gosh.
And we're moving all of our employees remote. So we're
Right.
trying to understand how to do that from a support. Like you bring all of this together,
Oh my
and the
goodness.
timing was crazy.
Yeah.
I'll be fully transparent. We had hour wait times at times for our support teams, and we do phone support as well as chat support and some other things, just because we couldn't get staffed up fast enough to respond. And meanwhile, we're trying to orient ourselves to new ownership.
Yeah.
So it was a crazy time. It was a time for get data fast and use data fast, because you had to be able to be only directionally right in order to respond from a staffing perspective, to respond from just a customer experience perspective in a time when the whole world was stressed.
Yeah.
So that created a lot of stress alongside this idea of thinking differently about how we deliver our experience at scale in an industry that had had large acquisitions go very, very poorly for them with other technologies similar to ours. So we had customers immediately reacting not only to panic, what do I do? All these learners are suddenly online and I need to get this right. Also to, wait, you got acquired and by private equity.
Right.
We don't trust that. You guys are just going to not care about the customer experience anymore, because that's what always happens. That's what I've always read about. It was just a really challenging time for us to steer through and make sure that we created long term lasting relationships with our customers, not just band-aided relationships to get them through a tough time.
Yeah. Yeah, and what was the impact on your team?
So the impact on the team, there were positives and negatives. I think the team, in a lot of ways, just put their head down and said, "We're going to get through this. We care about the customer at the end of the day so passionately. We are going to find a way." So we had things like 115% utilization in services. People were working nights and weekends. We had mandatory overtime and extended shifts and support. We had customer success managers that customers were calling over the weekend because they were trying to figure something out because they had, delivery deadlines on the following day.
Yeah.
So much pressure, but the team cared so deeply. It was almost like when you're in, I don't know if there's runners listening, but where you're in the middle of the run, you just dig in and go. It was a bit of that, which was great because it got us through that. But I don't think people emotionally managed
Mm,
well through that. So they weren't we weren't, and this was I think a failure on my part too. Let's be present into how we're feeling and what are we doing. Let's be present to what we don't want to repeat, but this is a moment in time and we just need to get through it. Let's be present to the fact that we're all now remote and we're in our houses and we may not have kid care or we may not have the ability in our spaces to manage working like we used to by not going into an
yeah.
office. So we just never acknowledged that in a meaningful way until probably we hit like October. And then it was like, okay, we're in a groove. We're clearly remote now. We got through the peak. Whew, let's take a breath and let's emotionally heal
Yeah.
and be aware of what we need, even if it's get on a Zoom and be in costumes and goof around with your colleagues, right? For Halloween, any of those pieces, like what do we need to serve back to ourselves? Because we just gave all of ourselves and then some to our customers.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, that just sounds like such a perfect storm.
It was in a lot of ways. And I don't think any of us were prepared, me included, our leadership, the rest of our leadership included, because you didn't know what was coming around the corner either.
Yeah.
With the acquisition, we could predict that, and that was at least useful in the stability. Yet there was still change coming with that, but we just didn't know what was coming around the corner with COVID.
Yeah.
So if I had it to do all over again, or if I face some sort of major disruptor in how we do work or how learning changes, I I will definitely think about how do you create a track alongside all of your success metrics, and we're going to drive to these outcomes. How do I create a wellness track
Mm.
right alongside that so that there are regular check-ins, even if the pace is really difficult, how do we help manage ourselves through that so that you build a resilience, and when you get to the other side of it, you have a team that's even more proud and even more passionate about
Hmm.
the work that they've done.
Yeah. I mean, it's so crazy. It's like it's been over 3 years, and I mean, people get COVID now, and it's like whatever. It's like it's what they said that it would be. It's like has become kind of like the cold or worse, the flu. But I think we were all going through trauma as well, and the fear of literally dying. And I remember feeling so helpless and trying to figure out. We're trying to learn how to sew so that I could sew masks and donate them to first responders. And I got my mom's old sewing machine and I could not get it to work. And I I asked the guy who works on my car to donate some rags, but then they all smelled like gasoline and didn't end up helping anybody. But I remember that desire to do something. And I imagine that that was at least probably a silver lining for your team and probably helped motivate them even though they were, exhausted, while the rest of us were kind of twiddling our thumbs in our homes. Like you guys were doing the real work and really helping people educate our children.
Yeah, I think, and thank you for that. It did keep the team going because at the end of the day, we knew we're sustaining education in a really uncertain time. And if you ever needed education, you needed it in uncertain times.
Yeah.
But I think what also it's so interesting to tell the story about remembering, remembering trying to sew masks. I think there's so many things that my team and in customer experience in general across industries, because it changed for almost everybody overnight. Remembering back to, you had to learn new things because
Mhm.
people needed help in new ways. I think about our support team, and we needed to do some training on how to handle more emotionally fragile people. We would get more students than ever that would call up that were in a really difficult
Oh
place.
gosh.
And we have protocols for how we do that, but that wasn't something that we trained in depth on
Yeah.
across our support organization, because typically if a student's calling us, it's because they can't log in. That's usually not too much of a dramatic moment, or maybe they're
Right.
upset, right? And if a teacher's calling us, it's because something didn't look right in their course
Yeah.
or some link didn't work. Also can be frustrating, right? It's kind of like trying to buy a ticket for a flight and not getting it to work. It's that frustrating, but it's not tears. My whole world is shattered and now I can't do this one thing, and all of that emotional distress is going to outlet through that one technical thing I can't
Yeah.
do. So we had to do things like teach people how to relate and support people. We had to create new paths for escalation if we thought somebody was at risk mentally. We had to think differently about how we proactively reached out to people because we knew that people were under significant stress. So,
Mm.
thinking about particularly K 12 teachers, because they didn't have the same experience that higher education, at least in the US, did around teaching online. So, we had to think differently about everything from how do we message to them to what kind of email cadence did we have? Is this too much? Is this too little? All the little things that you took for granted before, you had to train and be very present and real to, because people were now in a different state of mind for quite a long time. And I would say some of that has sustained. Some of it's gone back to perhaps pre-COVID, but there's been a sustained different state of mind that has shaped how we do our work in customer experience, at least.
Mm. What did you learn about yourself during that time?
What did I learn about myself during both COVID and, I would say, and the take private experience, since they both hit at the same time?
Mhm.
I learned that people leadership is the most important thing that you can provide. You need to provide a safe, secure, you can be you in times of difficulty environment. And I think I knew that. It was kind of my instinct or my default leadership style, but I don't think I was ever aware of it at that level, or understood that that had a positive impact on outcomes. So really just, leading from within and leading with empathy gets you through difficult times, especially when you're asking people to do difficult things. The numbers and the margins and the direction and the output stayed the same, but how you led people through that made a difference. So that was one big thing. The other big thing I think I've learned over the last couple of years working through this is that you have to be ready to learn new things.
Mhm.
And down to the way we reported and looked at our renewals business, to just even interacting in a different way with executive leadership or boards. Those things, you have to always be ready to learn new. And I don't think I think it's easy when you get I'm 25 years into my ed tech career. I think it's easy when you start to hit about 10, 15 years. You create playbooks for yourself or operating methods, and it's easy to just they work. And so it's easy to just keep using
Yeah.
them. And a lot of times they'll still drive change. I mean, they're meaningful, but you got to be willing to learn completely new ones, because that is where you will find your challenges that you didn't know were there. And it's also where you'll find opportunities for success that you never thought you had.
And are those changes usually driven by like new personalities or ways that you're learning about your field driven by curiosity?
I think those changes are driven by external inputs and sort of the evolution of your internal environment. So, from an external perspective, just being open to hear how other people do things and willing to try them.
Hmm.
Part of being taken private, uh, us as the executive team, so I'm part of the executive team, we would get coaches, and they were people that had been long standing in their careers and were operating partners or consultants for the owner, so for Thoma Bravo. And in them, I got paired up with somebody that had been doing customer experience for a very, very long time and at different companies outside of educational technology. And I could have easily gone into those conversations showing him what I was doing and leading the conversation and not defending the work that I was doing, but showing it, right? So that it was there for feedback. But instead I asked a lot of questions and he would throw ideas out. And even if my instinct was, I'm not sure that was going to work, I'm going to try that actually. Let me try that and come back to you and tell you, does this visualization make sense to you? Does this strategy make sense based on the feedback? And there are things, he was a gift, and there are things from that exchange that now would be in my playbook that may not have been. And I could have survived perfectly fine. I could have performed perfectly fine without them, but by having them in my arsenal, I'm able to be that much more successful
Yeah.
in unexpected ways. So I'd say externally and then internally to exactly what you described, reacting to personalities, people, approaches, seeing how the system lives and breathes through change.
Mm. You've kind of addressed this already through other questions, but just curious if you, as you reflect on your career, and I mean, you're a C-level exec at this extremely successful company and you've accomplished a lot in your career. A lot of people don't get there. And so I think a lot of people listening to this podcast or other professional podcasts, one of the things that's in the back of their mind is how do I get to that next level? And so as you reflect on where you've been and where you are, do you have anything, any pieces of advice, or is there something that you've noticed in other people that really makes you want to root for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll share two things. One, I shouldn't have gotten there. If you look at my career, I started in the K-12 classroom and was running a nonprofit in a K-12 setting. I'm not typical of what an exec would be, particularly coming from industry more than coming from my discipline. But also, I started later. I spent a lot of time. I did two master's degrees and had fun in education and learned, and I was hungry for learning. I tried different jobs. I went back and forth from being on the education side in an institution or teaching on to the vendor side or the technology side. So in theory, my path shouldn't have led me necessarily to a C-level role. So my first word of advice is there is no path to a C-level role that is scripted. I think it is what you make of it, and it is your temperament and what you bring to an organization that will drive your opportunity to be in a C-level role. So to that point, my second reflection is that I looked at all doors as opportunities. So a lot of times, I will work with people or mentor folks, or I look at candidates and they'll explain to me their path, and there is a very deliberate cadence to that. And then if you ask them, where do you want to be in 5 years, there's a very deliberate cadence to that. And I then ask, I think about, what are all the things you turned down to
Mm.
have that cadence? And is there anything that you would think about today that would give you a broader range or breadth to who you are that would actually keep you on your path or accelerate your path? So I'll give an example. So I had an opportunity early on in my career to step into work for a vendor, a technology company, an LMS company, not the one I'm currently at, out of higher education. And I was in my doctorate at the time. I was almost completed with my classwork and I was going to head into a dissertation. So I had a very academic, higher education path that I had started to build for myself. And so I got this opportunity. I was recruited for this LMS role, and it was early on in their journey, and it was to be basically a pedagogical consultant. So the role neither here nor there. It was a step back if you looked at ladder to ladder. It was less money, but it was an opportunity for me to see a different setting, a different perspective, and learn something new, which intrigued me. I thought, okay, if they're recruiting me and I can see why they want me, they've made that very clear. Let me go try this. It may not be forever, but let me go try this. I ended up staying in that role for 7 years. And in so many ways, that role, and then it grew. It grew. I got into a manager role and a more senior level role. But in so many ways, I think about that particular role and how it's shaped certain capabilities that I've built over time that have directly impacted my ability to be a successful C-level executive, or to least understand. It was a very sales oriented role, and it helped me understand the role that plays. That would have been an easy door for me to turn down. It had all the reasons why to pass it up, and yet it unlocked huge opportunity for me. So I would say, know that everybody can have a path to a C-level. You just need to know how to build and develop yourself and your network to get there. And that also you need to think about every door that opens for you as an opportunity. Now, don't take all of them, but really think about them as an opportunity that might be, it feels like tangential, but it actually might be a different loop around to that end result that you're hoping for. And it might get you even there quicker.
That's great advice. And I think also, I mean, some of the most successful people that I know, it's no opportunity is wasted too, right?
Yep.
It's really taking what you've learned and applying that as you have. So,
Yeah. And have a little hustle with that
yeah.
too. Sometimes those opportunities are in your own organization. Another good example. So I started in a business development function and then started running partnerships for Instructure. And they came to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in leading our customer development team?" So it's a custom development. They focus on, it's an engineering team. And I thought, well, first of all, I've never run an engineering team. And second of all, that seems, I already have a full-time job. That seems like an additional job.
Yeah.
But I said, wait, you're asking me to do this. Can I still find a way to do this and maybe do a little bit less of my partner job so I can balance this? I want to be fair and own my own work-life balance in all of this. I don't want to work 90-hour weeks. But let's talk about what this would look like. And again, that actually was the first moment in which I started to build the broader customer experience team at Instructure and ended up a C-level exec focusing on that, all because I said yes to that opportunity and helped craft what that should look like so that it could still be meaningful while I was doing the work that I was doing.
Have you ever said no to opportunities? Which ones have
I
you said
have.
no to?
Yeah. So the first story that I shared about that sales oriented, I led a solutions engineering team for those that know what that is. Anyway, I was asked to do the same thing right about the time when I was asked to, it was just before actually, when I was asked to do the custom development team or run that team as part of our services team, probably about 6 months before, I was asked to come do that same job that I had done earlier in my career but at Instructure, very lucrative job. It would have taken my compensation down a different path, for sure at the time. But I had been there and done that. And I actually turned it down. I took risk. It was in my own organization and they were super excited about me. And I said, I've done that before. I'm looking to build new skills and still have the same kind of impact on the organization. And I appreciate the money and that is really attractive. And thank you, but I'm gonna stick with what I'm doing. And then that custom development role picked up 6 months later, and then probably within a year and a half, I had all of customer experience. So I didn't know that that's where that was
Yeah.
going, but I'm really happy that and my organization is actually fine that I said no to. There's no resentment. They all see why I was still able to commit, my skills and my passion to the organization. I didn't have to take what they offered me.
Yeah. So, what would you say drives you in your decision making?
People. I think people drive me in my decision making, but I think it's because you are in service of and in partnership with people in everything that you do. So the service of is as a leader, especially as you grow in an organization, you're responsible for understanding, in my belief, your work so that you can create the resources in the space for your team to be that much better at that work than you would ever be. But it takes knowing your work. It's not just, I think I hear people, I just want to coach and develop people. I just want to help them unlock their career. And sometimes you have to know the career to be able to help them unlock the career. So you need to be in service of that because that's how you raise up and find the best in people and you help them find the best in themselves. I think you're also in partnership with people. So this is where understanding how to interact in teams, how to manage up and down, how to manage people with different agendas and different desires for the same potential outcome.
Hmm.
And so I would say it's people that drives me. I love unpacking that. I love figuring out what does it take to create and harness a group of people's energy in such a way that what comes out of it is completely unexpected and hugely impactful. And then I also love thinking about that operational piece of how do you actually build a system out of a group of people
Yeah,
and how do the way that they interact and work also drive the unexpected.
I love it. I love it. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm touched and honored that you had me, and I really enjoy being able to reflect on even some of my own parts of my journey in this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, well, this was super valuable. I know my audience is going to enjoy it, and yeah, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. Me too.
All right, take care, Melissa.